Good evening, viewers. Welcome back to my channel, Literati. And if you like the content which is uploaded here, please like and subscribe to my channel and leave your comments in the comment section. I will continue with my series on the Wasteland, which is the greatest epic of the 20th century and which is a very significant commentary on the deterioration of the modern day civilization. Since it is a great epic, it is in 5 parts, and each part is dense with very complex imagery and complex ideas. Considering the fact that T.S.Eliot has similarities with the Imagist movement, where a series of images are used in a kind of procession to express ideas, and they assume a kind of very eloquent expression of the ideas which are the feelings which the poet wants to portray. We know that this entire great magnum opus is a continuous procession of images which are drawn from varied sources, from Bible, from ancient classical literature, from the world of myths, from the world of legends, from the world of philosophy, from medieval tales, fertility rituals, systems of belief, not only of Christianity, but also of Oriental wisdom as well. Today, I will analyze the briefest section of the Wasteland, and this is the 4th part, Death by Water. This entire poem has been created with water as a symbol of fertility. Where there is no water, the world is just a heap of broken images. The world is a desert landscape, a fact which has been emphasized again and again. In the first part, the burial of the dead. Also in the last part, where the parched earth is expressive of a land which has become arid and which has become lifeless. So what does this title signify? Death by water. It means an excess of something, when the senses are overwhelmed, when there is a surfeit, then even water, which is a symbol of life, in the absence of which the world becomes sterile and the world becomes arid and all the possibilities are negated. Absence of water is synonymous with negativity. So what does death by water mean? And this is a section which has only 10 lines, which comes as a contrast at the preceding part, a fire sermon, which was the longest part of the poem and which contains 137 lines. This part talks about Phlebas, the Phoenician sailor. Another point which I've emphasized again and again is the fact that in spite of the chaotic impression of images, ideas, concepts, expressions coming from different directions constantly, they are conscious parallels, they are crisscrossing references, they are echoes which occur in the entire poem and which point out to the fact that there is a very discernible pattern and an element of continuity in this entire great epic. So these lines, Death by Water, they talk about Phlebas the Phoenician, whose life involved with his commercial calculations, with his transactions, with his counting of profit and losses, but now he has been dead a fortnight. Here, the words fortnight are not really significant of 15 days, but here time ceases to matter because it can be either the past or the present, or the fact that he has been dead for some time. It does not really calculate to 15 days because, as the section expresses, calculations are immaterial beyond a point. And Phlebas, the Phoenician sailor, he is beyond profit and losses. He has lost all movement. Only his bones are picked up by the currents under the sea. And he is now in a space where these worldly things, the material desires which had propelled him in life, they do not matter. He is beyond all that. So this is a comment on the futility of human desires and the constant materialism with which we involve ourselves. The second stanza talks about how he has lost all his physical movement. Only his bones are picked up in whispers. As he rose and fell, he passed the stages of age and youth, entering the whirlpool. Now he is beyond all worldly desires. He is beyond all worldly concerns. He is beyond all earthly, we can say, preoccupations. They do not matter any longer. He has passed beyond this life, beyond the various stages of childhood, youth, and age, and he has entered the whirlpool. Whirlpool, again, it brings back the images from the previous parts, from lines 50, from the lines in The Burial of the Dead, where Madame Sosostris talks about the wheel or the circle or the whirlpool. They mean something which moves round and round continuously. It does not have a beginning or an end. So this image of the wheel or the circle or the whirlpool is very mystical, and it is considered a very powerful image in many systems of belief. And they are present in the very first part when Madame Sosostris is reading the cards. They are present here. The whirlpool is the image of something which moves round without stopping, and it moves within itself. So this passage of life is also continuous. It does not stop. Just like the whirlpool, or just like a wheel, it does not have a beginning or an end, but it is a passage which is continuous, and we are just moments in that passage. So what is the point of being too involved in the worldly desires and our pursuit of materialism and consumerism? The last three lines say Gentile or Jew. Gentile is a reference to Christians, and Jew is, of course, the Jewish people. Here, what is said is just an expression of humanity at large, the world at large, mankind at large. And the lines say that, oh, you who turn the wheel. Again, the image of the wheel which moves round and it does not have a beginning and an end. And look to windward. All of us look forward. We look towards the future. Towards windward means to look forward. Consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. And the words are a reminder of the fact that we are all mortal. Death is inevitable. This passage of life is transient. To involve ourselves too much in materialism is futile, because this life is just a temporary phase, and all of us will end up like Phlebas. Consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. And when Phlebas was in his prime, he was also full of confidence. He was handsome, he was tall, he had youth, he had vigor. But now, what remains of him is just the bones under the water, which are picked up in whispers, and he is beyond everything. The fact that these lines, these 10 lines, Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls and the deep sea swell, and the profit and loss. A fortnight dead, like I said, it is not emphasized to a particular period, but a timeless span. It is a continuation of time which is in a continuous flow. And the profit and loss do not matter to Phlebas, who has been dead for a fortnight. What remains, he has lost his physical movement. What remains are his bones, which have moved with the sea, and he is not alive. He has lost his life, he has lost his will, he has lost the movement, and he is beyond the passage of youth and old age, and he has entered the whirlpool. The whirlpool is a continuous movement of time and of life. Like I said, the image of the wheel, the circle, the whirlpool, something which moves around and which does not have a beginning and an end, is a very, very mystical symbol present in many religions. The last 3 lines, a reminder of the mortality of man, and how, though we look towards the future, we are full of hope, we are full of desires, we are full of earthly concerns. We must remember and that this is temporary. Even Phlebas, who was tall and handsome like you, ended up beneath the sea and he's dead and nothing matters to him and he does not matter to anyone. These lines are very significant, coming immediately after the fire sermon, the sermon which is expressive of an ethical discourse, an expression of moral values, an edifying speech, we can say, with deep religious connotations. And T.S.Eliot in his notes has defined how he has been, he has made allusions, conscious allusions to St. Augustine's Confessions and also to Buddhist philosophy. The last lines of the fire sermon, when they talked about a feeling of regret, a consciousness of sin in the last parts, a feeling of repentance, a sense of repentance and a consciousness of sin, and the last lines depicted a sense of or a desire for penance, for a purification of the mind, the body and the soul, a kind of purgation of desire, a desire for salvation, which is a very ascetic idea, and which can be, this salvation can be achieved through a purification, a self-denial, a sacrifice and suffering. This was the idea which is present in ascetic religions ascetic beliefs like St. Augustine's Confessions and the Buddhist philosophy. So this, in the words, this idea of achieving salvation through self-denial and sacrifice and penance can be described as tapasya, and salvation can be depicted as moksha. So this desire for salvation was this deep religious feeling, this consciousness of sin, and the desire to get rid of the sin through penance was present in the last lines of the fire sermon. And significantly, the death by water, which immediately follows the fire sermon, talks about a surfeit of desire, of consumerism, of materialism, of earthly ties, of the bonds of this life and our concerns of profit and loss in this world, and the futility of it all, because ultimately like Phlebas the Phoenician, the final end is entering that whirlpool of an end, a death, an annihilation, a removal of, or a journey beyond profit and loss, and beyond our earthly desires and beyond materialism. So both the paths can be seen in relation to each other, and the continuation of the last line, or the feelings which are expressed in the last line, the desire for moksha, the element of tapasya, self-denial, sacrifice, is powerfully emphasized in Death by Water, which expresses the idea of mortality and the temporary importance of materialism, how if we involve ourselves too much in our worldly concerns, it leads to an excess, it leads to a surfeit, it leads to a dissatisfaction. The only way to achieve peace is to gain a kind of detachment, which is a very powerful idea in the Buddhist philosophy. To detach ourselves from the worldly pleasures and worldly desires ultimately leads us to a sense of peace and a sense of tranquility, which we cannot achieve if we engross ourselves too much in the pursuit of our desire for materialism and our involvement in this earthly life, which is temporary, because we must remember Phlebas, as the last lines stay with a note of irony, who was once handsome and tall as you, and you will also end up like him. And once more, to emphasize a point, water in this entire epic is symbolic of life and fertility and fruitfulness. In the absence of water, the world changes into a cursed land, a parched land, a desert landscape. It becomes lifeless. But here in this part, the title says Death by Water, which means an excess of anything leads to annihilation. A surfeit of anything leads to annihilation. This, like I said, I am emphasizing this fact once again, that though this great epic gives an impression of chaotic images coming one after the other, a kind of a confusing mix, the pattern, if we look carefully, is very visible in the symbols and the images which occur again and again. Also considering the fact that T.S.Eliot, along with other images, creates images which are expressive of ideas. This entire great epic is a continuous procession of images, and these images are not random, but they occur and recur, and there are deliberate parallels and conscious parallels in all the parts. To take the image of Phlebas the Phoenician, who is dead and underwater, we can remember other references to death by drowning, or a sailor, or the idea from The Tempest, the great Shakespearean play, the great Shakespearean romance, which is built around shipwreck and death by drowning, and also the fact that this death can lead to a kind of resurrection. But in death by water, the death does not lead to any resurrection. It is just a reminder of the mortality or the transient and the temporary quality of life. But this image of drowning, of death, occurs in the very first part, the Burial of the Dead, in lines 47, where the poet talks about the tarot cards which Madame Sosostris picks out, and in lines 47, the card says, the drowned Phoenician sailor. So this echo is present in death by water, where Phlebas, who is now dead, is a Phoenician sailor, the drowned Phoenician sailor. In lines 48, those are pearls that were his eyes look. Reference to the tempest. In the same part, the Burial of the Dead, Madame Sosostris tells her client in lines 55, fear death by water. So the image of drowning and death by water of the drowned Phoenician sailor, it occurs 3 times in the first part, the Burial of the Dead. In a game of chess, it occurs in line 124, where the echo from the very first part is repeated, or the echo is direct. Those are pearls that were his eyes look. The word look, the last part is not present. Those are pearls that were his eyes look is present in line 48 in the Burial of the Dead. The same line, those are pearls that were his eyes, is present in line 124 in a game of chess. Now this idea or this image of drowning or death by water is present in the fire sermon, and it is a reference to not only drowning but also tempest. Like I said, in tempest, the drowning leads to a new life when the shipwreck brings Ferdinand to the island and a new beginning for both Ferdinand and Miranda. The fire sermon, the idea or the image of shipwreck is present in line 191, musing upon the king my brother's wreck, and on the king my father's wreck before him, 191 and 192. It is again present, the reference to tempest is present in line 257, where there is the sound of music on a grimy modern day London reality, bringing the reader or the speaker to an age of romance, where the lines are, this music crept by me upon the waters. This is again a reference to the tempest. Another thing, the image of the drowned Phoenician sailor, it merges into other images. It can merge into the image of the fisher king who spent his days when his land was cursed due to his wound, and when he was incapacitated because of his wound, when he had turned impotent, his lands had become sterile, and he spent his days fishing. So the drowned Phoenician sailor, the fisher king, and the image of Mr. Sweeney from the fire sermon, the fisher king, the image of Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant, unshaven, in lines 209 and 210, the fire sermon, then they all seem to merge into one another, and they seem to create alternate realities. The image from the tempest promises towards a revival, a resurrection. the images of Mr. Eugenides to the sordid quality of modern day life with his unshaven cheeks and his pocket full of currants. Mr. Sweeney, also one of those very mundane and nondescript people who are present in the modern day world. The legend of the Fisher King and the images from the Tempest are different in the sense that they promise a resurrection or a possibility of regeneration. But Mr. Eugenides and Mr. Sweeney and the drowned Phoenician sailor point to an end and point to an annihilation, and they also are images of something which is without any possibility of any regeneration. As a contrast, the image of the Fisher King and the echoes from the Tempest are replete with the promise of a new beginning, a rejuvenation, a regeneration. So regeneration and revival are the central idea of this great epic, and the final part, that is what the thunder said, will also end on this note, the idea or the possibility of a regeneration or a revival. While this death by water, it very powerfully and with great emphasis and with a great eloquence, drawing the image of the Phoenician sailor from the first part, talks about annihilation, end, mortality, and the impermanence of life. And it is like a brief spell which occurs before the final part, which is very intense and which draws a disturbing picture of the world. But like I said, the link is very obvious from the last lines of the fire sermon, where the desire for salvation and the desire for purification, the desire for of penance leading to an elevation and to a space of peace is contrasted with the image of materialism and the earthly involvement and the irony and the futility of it all. So thank you.